Hello, everyone, and welcome back to SophieTalk. We're really happy you're here today. Whether you're listening on your morning walk, driving to work, making dinner, or simply relaxing at home, thank you for letting us spend a little part of your day with us. We always hope these conversations leave you feeling just a little more confident than you were before you pressed play.
Absolutely. And if this is your first time listening, welcome. Here at Sophie Talk, we don't believe learning English has to feel stressful. We like having real conversations about real situations because that's how English is actually used. It's less about memorizing perfect sentences and much more about understanding how people naturally communicate.
You know, Leo, I've been thinking about something lately. It's a question we've seen again and again from listeners all over the world, different countries, different languages, different backgrounds, but somehow they're all asking almost exactly the same thing.
Really? Let me guess. Is it another question about grammar? Maybe the present perfect or those confusing phrasal verbs everyone seems to worry about?
No, actually, it isn't grammar this time. The question is much simpler, but I honestly think it's much more important. People keep asking us, how can I stop translating everything before I speak English?
That's such a good question because I don't think there's a single English learner who hasn't experienced that at some point. Even learners with a pretty good vocabulary sometimes feel stuck because every sentence has to travel through another language before it comes out.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is that many people immediately blame themselves. They think, maybe I'm just too slow, or maybe I'm not smart enough to learn English. But honestly, neither of those things is usually true.
Right. Most of the time, the problem isn't intelligence at all. It's simply a habit. And the funny thing about habits is we repeat them so often, we eventually stop noticing they're there. Translation becomes something our brain does automatically, almost without asking our permission.
Can I ask you something? Have you ever had one of those moments when someone asked you a really easy question in English and somehow it still felt difficult to answer?
Oh, definitely. I remember someone once asked me, "What did you have for lunch?" It couldn't have been a simpler question. I knew every single word. I understood it immediately. But instead of answering, my brain quietly started translating everything. By the time I finally spoke, there had already been this awkward little silence.
I think that's such a relatable experience. And what's interesting is that the silence isn't happening because you don't know English. It's happening because your brain is trying to do several different jobs at exactly the same time.
Exactly. First, you understand the English question, then you translate it into your native language. After that, you think of your answer, then you translate your answer back into English. Finally, you check the grammar one more time before you actually speak. That's a lot of work for just one simple conversation.
When you describe it like that, it almost sounds exhausting. No wonder conversations sometimes feel so fast. It's not always because native speakers talk too quickly. Sometimes it's because our own brain is taking the longest possible route to reach an answer.
That's a great way to put it. Imagine driving somewhere that's only 5 minutes away, but instead of taking the direct road, you decide to drive around the entire city first. Eventually you'll arrive, but it'll take much longer than it needs to.
And that's exactly what translation can feel like. It gets you to the right answer eventually, but sometimes it takes a much longer path. The good news is that your brain can learn a shorter route. That's really what today's conversation is all about.
We're not going to tell you to stop translating overnight because that's simply not realistic. Instead, we'd like to show you how fluent speakers gradually become less dependent on translation until one day they realize they're thinking directly in English without even trying.
And honestly, I think that's one of the most exciting moments in language learning. It doesn't happen with fireworks or dramatic music. One day, you simply notice that someone asked you a question, and somehow you answered before your brain had time to translate anything at all.
It's such a small moment, but it feels huge. Suddenly you realize, wait, I actually thought in English. And that's when you understand something really important. Fluency isn't one giant leap. It's hundreds of tiny moments like that, quietly happening over time.
You know, Leo, I think a lot of people listening are probably wondering something right now. If translating slows us down so much, why does our brain keep doing it? I mean, if it's making conversations harder, why doesn't the brain simply skip that step and go straight to English?
That's actually a really interesting question, and the answer is surprisingly simple. Your brain isn't trying to make English more difficult, it's actually trying to help you. Whenever we learn something new, our brain naturally connects it to something familiar because that's the fastest way to understand it.
So, in a way, translation isn't really the problem.
Exactly. Translation is more like training wheels on a bicycle. When you're first learning to ride, those little wheels help you stay balanced. They make you feel safe, and they're incredibly useful at the beginning. But imagine riding with training wheels for the next 10 years. Eventually, they stop helping, and they actually slow you down.
I love that comparison because it changes the way we think about translation. Instead of seeing it as something bad, we can see it as something temporary. It helps us get started, but it isn't meant to stay with us forever.
Right, and I think that's where many learners become frustrated. They expect themselves to throw away those training wheels overnight, but that's not how habits work. Your brain doesn't suddenly wake up one morning and decide to learn a completely different way of thinking.
Exactly. Habits change gradually, and honestly, that's good news, because it means you don't have to become perfect tomorrow. You only need to help your brain rely on translation a little less than it did yesterday.
That's a much healthier goal. Instead of asking yourself, how do I stop translating completely, ask yourself, how can I give my brain one more opportunity to think directly in English today? That tiny change in mindset removes so much unnecessary pressure.
You know, I remember something that happened to me a long time ago. I was trying to order coffee in English, and before I spoke, I spent almost 20 seconds preparing one simple sentence in my head. By the time I finally said it, I realized I probably could have ordered the coffee 3 different times.
I think we've all been there. And the funny part is that after the conversation ended, you probably realized the sentence wasn't nearly as difficult as your brain made it seem.
Exactly. Looking back, I knew every single word. The difficult part wasn't English. The difficult part was all the extra thinking happening before I spoke.
And that's something I'd really like everyone listening to remember. Speaking isn't only about vocabulary, it's also about trust. Do you trust yourself enough to speak before you've created the perfect sentence? That's the real question.
That's interesting because I don't think many learners think about confidence that way. They usually believe confidence comes after fluency, but maybe it actually works the other way around.
I think it does. Every time you allow yourself to speak a little sooner, even if your sentence isn't perfect, you're teaching your brain something important. You're teaching it that communication is safe. And once your brain feels safe, it gradually stops depending on translation quite so much.
So maybe fluency isn't about speaking perfectly. Maybe it's about becoming comfortable with being a little imperfect.
Exactly. Think about native speakers for a moment. They change their minds halfway through a sentence, they forget words, they repeat themselves. Sometimes they stop and think before continuing. Real conversations are wonderfully imperfect, and that's completely normal.
That's actually comforting, because I think many learners imagine fluent speakers never hesitate. But if you listen carefully to everyday conversations, you'll hear pauses, corrections, and little moments of thinking all the time.
Absolutely. The difference is that native speakers don't panic when those moments happen. They simply continue the conversation. That's the mindset we want to build in English, too.
So instead of chasing perfection, maybe we should start chasing comfort. If speaking English feels a little more comfortable this week than it did last week, that's real progress.
I couldn't agree more. And the wonderful thing is that comfort grows through experience. Every conversation, every podcast, every sentence you understand, and every moment you choose to think in English instead of translating is helping your brain build that confidence little by little.
And the best part is, you probably won't even notice it's happening.
One day, someone will ask you a simple question, you'll answer immediately, and only afterward will you realize, wait a second, I never translated that.
Those are my favorite moments because they remind us that progress is often invisible while it's happening. Then suddenly, one ordinary conversation shows you just how far you've come.
So, Leo, before we finish today's conversation, I'd love to leave everyone listening with something practical. We've talked about why our brains translate, why it's completely normal, and why trying to force yourself to stop usually doesn't work. But let's imagine someone finishes this episode and asks, what should I actually do tomorrow? Where would you tell them to begin?
Honestly, I'd tell them not to change everything at once. We often think progress comes from making huge changes, but language learning rarely works that way. Instead, choose one ordinary moment during your day, maybe while you're making breakfast, walking to work, or waiting for the bus. For just 5 minutes, try to describe what's happening around you in English.
And I think that's important because those are real situations, not imaginary exercises. You're talking about your own life, your own thoughts, and your own experiences. That makes the language feel much more personal. And when something feels personal, it's usually much easier for our brains to remember.
Exactly. You don't need difficult vocabulary either. You might simply think, the coffee smells really good. It's colder today than yesterday. I forgot my umbrella. Those aren't impressive sentences, but they're useful, and that's what matters. Fluency grows from using simple English naturally, not from knowing complicated words you never actually use.
You know, I think many learners underestimate how powerful simple practice can be. They believe they need to study for hours before they'll notice any improvement. But sometimes 5 minutes of real thinking in English can teach your brain more than an hour of translating vocabulary lists.
I completely agree. Consistency is far more important than intensity. If you spend just a few minutes thinking in English every single day, your brain slowly starts recognizing English as something normal instead of something that only exists inside a classroom.
Can I ask you one last question? When do you think people should stop translating? Is there a moment when they should simply decide, that's it, I'm never translating again?
Honestly, no, I don't think it works like that. Translation doesn't disappear because you force it to. It fades away because your brain slowly discovers an easier way. One day you notice you're translating a little less. A few weeks later, you realize you're answering simple questions immediately. Then months later, you suddenly catch yourself thinking in English without even trying.
I really love that because it takes away so much pressure. Instead of chasing some magical day called fluency, we can simply enjoy getting a little more comfortable every week.
Exactly. And here's something I'd like everyone listening to remember. Don't compare yourself to someone who's been speaking English for 10 years. Compare yourself to the person you were 6 months ago. Chances are you already understand more, speak more confidently, and hesitate less than you used to. That's progress, even if it doesn't always feel dramatic.
Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Think about today's conversation and ask yourself one simple question. When do you notice yourself translating the most? Is it during conversations, while reading, maybe while you're writing emails or answering unexpected questions? We'd genuinely love to know because every learner's experience is a little different.
And here's our challenge for you this week. Every day, choose just one ordinary moment and spend 5 minutes thinking only in English. Don't worry about making mistakes. Don't stop every time you forget a word. Just keep your thoughts moving. If you don't know a word, explain the idea another way and continue. Your goal isn't perfection. Your goal is momentum.
Because that's exactly how confidence grows. Not through perfect grammar, not through memorizing thousands of words overnight. Confidence grows every time you successfully communicate an idea, no matter how simple that idea might be. Every small success teaches your brain that English is becoming more natural.
And one day, maybe sooner than you expect, someone will ask you a question in English. You'll smile, answer immediately, and only afterward realize something surprising. You didn't translate. You simply understood, thought, and spoke.
Those quiet little moments are what fluency really looks like. They're easy to miss, but they're incredibly meaningful because they remind you that all those small daily efforts were working, even on the days when you couldn't see the progress yourself.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. We truly hope this conversation encourages you to be a little more patient with yourself. Learning a language isn't a race, and there isn't a perfect timeline. Everyone moves at a different pace, and that's completely okay.
If you enjoyed today's conversation and you'd like to hear more natural English discussions like this one, we'd really appreciate it if you followed SophieTalk and shared this episode with another English learner. You never know who might need a little encouragement today.
Until next time, keep listening, keep speaking, keep making mistakes, and most importantly, keep trusting yourself. Every conversation is another step forward.
Take care, keep believing in your progress, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye, everyone.
See you next time.